Welcome guys, gals, and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joel, I'm one of your hosts, and with me as always is your other rowdy host.
Rowdy? Oh, Brian, hi, how's it going?
That's your name, you're a rowdy boy, always up to hijinks.
That's true, that is what I'm known for. How are you, Joel?
Good, blustery.
Yeah.
You feel blustery?
It's stormy weather here. There's a storm going on in Ireland. The schools are closed today for people in orange and red warning areas, but yellow warning people can get fucked.
And colourblind people.
Yep, for sure. So yeah, we have a storm warnings out, and it's very blustery. We got out for a walk earlier with the dog, which was nice. And it was kind of like, it was nice and calm, but I think it's going to get worse for the evening and then should improve for the rest of the day, apparently.
It got nice and calm, and yet you made me stand for a good 30 seconds getting battered in the face with rain while you took a photo that made it look like a rainbow was coming out of my mouth.
Joel, okay.
Am I wrong? So you can't counter.
I just think that, like, you know, the thing is that, like, you want that photo actually. It's just that I said, let's do this. You're like, well, Brian asked it, therefore bad. But I do want it, and we'll use it.
You seem to think every bad thing you do to me I want.
That sounds not good. Okay, so this episode is season 7, episode 16. It is Storyteller. It was directed by Marita Grabiak, who also directed 5 episodes of Angel. She directed an episode of Dollhouse, 1 episode of Firefly, some BSG, Alias, Lost, and an episode of Gilmore Girls, which was the Reigning Lorelai, which is an episode I love.
Yeah,
it's the episode where Emily's mother died. Sorry, Richard's mother dies, and they immediately have the same actress play a different role, which is
that's so weird.
Just like Gilmore Girls, every so often you realize is like farce.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
While also being like genuine, while also being like totally unrealistic. No one actually talks like that, but then also deeply humanist.
There's another Gilmore Girls connection in this episode as well, you notice.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later maybe. But it was written by Jane Espenson, and the last episode she wrote was First Date. Okay, and here's your Buffy Ann summary. Did I say this episode was Storyteller? I think I did. Oh yeah, and it was first aired on February 25th, 2003. Andrew films a video journal of life with the Slayers and potentials, irritating everyone. Xander and Anya have sex to make their breakup concrete. Sunnydale goes into meltdown. Buffy, Spike, Wood, and Andrew fight their way in, and Buffy threatens to use Andrew's blood to close a seal. As she guessed, his tears of repentance work. Okay, I think that has really I don't think I would remember that episode from that description, which is not great.
So sidling over to the Bronze for our banter, the Bronze will stay open despite inclement weather warnings. Which I think is something I don't think they don't feel like a very safe establishment. They don't.
I mean, look at the amount of times they had to close for like defumigation or fumigation.
You fumigate it first, and then you defumigate it.
Okay. Yeah. Which I mean would indicate to me that they're not hugely interested in safety first, anyway. If they're already needing to be fumigated,
or even just staying open when people keep dying there.
True.
So we're over in the Bronze, battening down the hatches. And what have you been up to this week, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I have been. Generally, like, it's been kind of a busy week, I suppose. Generally not doing anything too intense. Lots of work stuff. We watched a lot of good TV, I would say. On Friday, the final 6 episodes or 7 episodes maybe of Pen 15 came out, and it is the conclusion of the show. So the Maya Erskine and I can never remember her name.
Anna Conkle.
Oh, cool. So who are the creators and stars of Pen 15 have decided that this second half of season 2, which got they interrupted the show for a while due to COVID, is going to be the conclusion of the show, which is fitting and appropriate and good. I don't mind a show that ends
when it's ready to end. Yeah,
exactly. And it was a critical darling, so like it certainly wasn't being pushed off the air. But so we would have talked about this show in January quite a bit. We watched it over the Christmas break last year, and it was a revelation, I would say. It was stunningly, brilliantly good. It is about these two characters, basically these two comedians playing fictional versions of their teenage selves into the year 2000 when they were 13 or so, and it's them playing it as women in their early to mid 30s, while everyone else is appropriately aged. So like they'll be in class like doing gross 13-year-old stuff, and everyone else is actually 13 and they are adults.
It's quite dislocating to watch, I think.
Yeah, it is deeply cringe, I would say. It's like real...
It's cringe comedy, and I think Maya is... we said this before, I've never seen an actor debase themselves personally so much for a role. It is difficult 100%. To watch.
It is just like deeply, deeply uncomfortable. It's also incredibly sweet and really genuine character exploration. In the first half of season 2, I think we noted there was an episode with a gay boy as the main character, essentially, or like heavily focused on him, and it was just incredibly sweet and sad, and I remember like really identifying with it. I have to rewatch it. You get just like explorations of the characters, like, you know, like racial identities, there are issues around their parents like divorcing, pressures around sex and relationships, and the final episodes were like true to that. Like it had some of their absolute cringiest, most awkward, funniest moments.
Yeah.
And then also the sweetest, most sincerest things that have happened in the show.
A conclusion and a climax that was so small and local but felt absolutely triumphant.
Yeah.
And also what I think is worth saying is...
a future cult classic, undoubtedly.
The show, I think, definitely exposed some fantastic young acters. Like, we don't give enough credit to the fact, like, the two leagues are fantastic.
Every single child actor, teen actors was stunning. Yeah, really, really good. Right.
And yet to be absolutely divergent, a pen 15, or as you might... penis. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely recommend that. Yeah.
So otherwise, we also watched... we'd left last week's Succession episode. We hadn't watched it, so we watched it over the weekend, and then we watched Sunday's episode last night. And my God, is that show fucking good? It's really like specifically good at the moment. The beginning of season 3 was a little slow to start, but like it has like the worst thing that ever happened in Succession happened last night. Yeah.
So we're not the only people who like Succession, but I have the same feeling as a lot of people every time I sit down to watch it, which is incredible tension going in, thrill ride as it happens, and sick to my stomach while watching certain things as well. But yet, you know, high art in many ways, riveting watching, great performances across the board. And there's a great article in the New Yorker this week as well, which is such a pretentious thing to have to say, but a profile of Jeremy Strong, who plays Kendall Roy. That's very interesting, so I recommend reading that as well.
Yeah, essentially he's been method acting it, but also it sounds like he's actually just the character. He's Kendall. Like there's no distinction between Kendall and him, and also like he seems to have misunderstood the assignment very deeply.
Yeah,
but it's working. It's definitely working, but it's...
Can he play something else? Would be the question then.
Yeah, it's bizarre. Apart from that, we finished Chucky, this show, and we talked about it last week, so we won't go on about it, but wonderful conclusion. Season 2 is going to be coming. Huge recommendation. Definitely go watch it. It is so stupid and so fun, and it's just real, like, you know, no didacticism to it whatsoever. It's just like, here's a show, enjoy it, see you later.
Cotton candy right to the brain.
Love it. Apart from that, also Joel, actually that's something I was going to say. We just got Joel's Star Trek fact files delivered. Yeah. These are we'll tweet out a photo. These are like the originator of like Joel's insane approach to like media. It is a 19 binder, 300 and something issue, 304 issue magazine issued between 96 and 2002, which are basically just insane amounts of information all about Star Trek, every Star Trek show to that point, all in universe. It's essentially a Wikipedia, like a fan Wikipedia before fan Wikipedias existed.
Yeah.
It is the most disturbed thing I've ever seen, but also
it's like a paper-based Wikipedia. I wish there was a word for that. It is disturbed. It is also the conclusion of my life's work. Like I would say the first issue that I picked up the first time I saw this on a newsstand for £2 Irish, I was probably about 6 years old.
So the other night we were having a couple of drinks, like a bit of a week and a half ago, and Joel was like, "Oh gosh, yeah, it'd be wonderful to own them someday, but I can't because I'm not a good enough person." And I was like, "Okay."
Quite how I put it.
I was like, "Okay, well here I found like all 300 copy or issues for like €100 or something. So I've ordered it and just calm down." And you were like, "No, me cannot have that." And I was like, "I've already ordered it." And you're like, "Oh, thank you." And then you cried, and then you told me you'll never say anything mean to me again, and you've already gone back on that, which is a shame.
This is all fictional.
But we have them now, and they're
last night while we were drinking, you did quiz me on random pages, and I think you were scared by how I was able to answer some of those questions.
It was disturbed.
Like, you just read out a serial number to me. I was able to tell you what ship it was.
Yeah. Anyway, you also, Joel, watched a bunch of you watched all of the second season of Saved by the Bell.
I did. I've talked about Saved by the Bell season 1 before, and I know it feels like a bit of a niche recommendation, but I honestly just feel so happy and comforted watching it. Season 2 of the revival, which I want to say is on Peacock, is kind of the exception that proves the rule. I find for this kind of stuff. It's obviously a reboot or a revival of the original Saved by the Bell, which has had numerous spin-offs and reboots and television films and all that kind of stuff. And it is better than all of them. It is better than a lot of comedies of its ilk on television, even just as a comedy by itself. I think it has done the best job I think I might have ever seen of taking a sequel to a legacy property, taking the best parts of it or the most useful parts of it and using it as fodder for genuinely new material. Saved by the Bell, it made like not a good show in many ways and quite a problematic show in a lot of ways in retrospect, and they really, I think, took that as their starting point and brought more diverse voices into the room and said, make fun of us, like make fun of the idea.
Yeah, the most disturbing part of Saved by the Bell is the fact that the leading podcast about Saved by the Bell, which is called Bayside Forever.
I actually can't remember. I did listen to it though.
You listened to it. It's one person hosting it. So it's not conversation, which I find so scary. Like, as in, if you're like that at work, there's some like true crime podcasts I listen to, which are just like one person delivering tons of facts and then some interviews and stuff, which works because it's a narrative. I don't know how you could do. Like, I don't know how we could do this.
It'd be like doing this by yourself. Yeah.
Anyway. Bayside Forever, I think, right? I think that's
I deleted it from my brain. I have no recollection of it whatsoever. But yeah, I really have to recommend it. It's short. It's genuine. You know, short episodes. It's genuinely funny. It had some of the like I actually laughed out loud watching this by myself, which is such a rare occurrence.
Impressive, given you're probably watching it at like 3 times speed as well.
Yeah, so I laughed 3 times faster. But the other thing is that, you know, there's a real conversation in it about both the lack of representation and the inequities and the kind of class and race issues in America, all that kind of stuff, which sounds very heavy and is inherently like serious, but is talked about in such a deft way, such an authentic way, and by the people it affects, like that it really comes across as no one's having these conversations, and like more nuanced conversations where you have, for example, a main character who's a trans girl talking to some of the many other black characters about the intersections of.
So the trans girl is white.
Is white, sorry. Yeah,
you said other
many other characters. So the other characters, many of whom are black. So it's a predominantly black school joined with Bayside, and they're having conversations about a number of kind of issues where there are intersectionalities between what's been like for trans people and for black people in America over the last 2 years, particularly, and differences. There's conversations within the group of black kids where one of the new girlfriends is quite wealthy, and the main character who's dating her is like reasonably less well off. So it's like he has class issues with her, but then she also raises that there's race issues that they both share, and for black people in a kind of a wealthier position, it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
And they make reference to Fresh Prince, all that kind of stuff. I'm just describing conversations, but it's genuinely well done. All the trans stuff, all the queer stuff in it. There's multiple queer characters. 2 of the main characters also are queer and bi specifically in a non-explosive way. It is just such a breath of fresh air, and all the legacy characters who come along with it not only bring great jokes, but they also like examine like what they didn't like about the original show. And I had a great amount of fun with it. I can't recommend. I think that template of I know we're just aging out of it now, but it actually does sound like a relevant conversation for people of that generation. Do you know what I mean? So I had a lot of fun listening to it, or watching it rather.
We said we'd talk about Booker got surgery last week as well, our lovely cat, but like it's not interesting. He had surgery. We were worried about a lump, but the lump turned out to not be a big deal. But he's now like has a vet medical t-shirt on, and you know he's doing great. But yeah, that's not very interesting information for a podcast, I don't think. But
no, the important message there, because people will be concerned about us as well, is that we were concerned about Booker. We took care of it. He's doing great.
Yeah, true.
He's all well.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to Buffy. So this episode is Storyteller. What was your recollection of this episode previous to this?
So talking about ultimately unnecessary surgery, in this episode we culminates in the students cutting out their own eyes. That's what I'm going for. That's what I'm trying to get to.
They're also removing lumps.
There, indeed, for sure. So what in terms of Storyteller, so yeah, obviously a significant episode of season 7, probably the one that it's not to the same heights, the one that's like the format episode, that kind of stands in the pantheon there with your hushes and your once more feeling, the body, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Like, I mean, they have done a format episode in every season since season 3. At least one. I'm trying to think if there are any specific format episodes in season 2. I don't think there are significant ones. I think the closest you get is like Bewitched, Bothered and Bewildered, which is a Buffy Light episode. Passion, I think, is probably a format episode in some ways because it is similarly like Angel's perspective and the kind of like framing narrative and removing from the characters. Yeah. But the first real format break obviously being the Zeppo. And then, like, actually, and then in season 4 you have 2. You have obviously Hush, and then also Superstar, very specific format break.
Absolutely.
Season 5 you have The Body. Season 6 you have, I think you have multiple in season 6, but in season 6 you certainly have Once More Feeling. Season 7, I would say Him is probably a format break as well to some degree, but this is obviously because in Him you have those like stylized split screen moments and stuff like that. In this episode, I think it's a very clear format break, though. It is, we have, in a very modernist kind of styling, you have the free and direct discourse perspective coming from Andrew here. Andrew's voice comes through the narrative and choices that are being presented here, the visual stylings. So you have him, you have Andrew determining the visual presentation of the episode by his imagination that at the beginning of the episode he's doing some masterpiece theater. You have the people reacting around him, like Buffy's speechifying in the episode isn't what Buffy would have said, as in there's lots of that to it where it's like clearly his perspective is skewing what is being presented, even on a micro level. Yeah,
there's a lot of bleed, pardon the pun, in the episode between the clearly fictional pieces, the scenes, perspectives, the stylized perspectives, the slightly altered flashbacks, and also his askew perspective on things that are currently actually definitely happening.
Yes, so like while Buffy is talking to the potentials, do we believe that any of the content that Andrew is communicating to us as being slightly overheard is being accurate? No, not necessarily. It is like filtered through the lens of his perspective.
I don't even think necessarily the opening scene where Buffy is fighting those 2 vampires, I didn't even feel that was accurate, because there was a huge amount of acrobatics in it, which I felt like a disproportionate amount of acrobatics.
100%.
Yeah, so I think it's really, like, we want to talk about unreliable narrator, like here's a class, and that, like, what happens in this episode can you say for certain definitely happened. Yeah.
And in some ways I really hate the phrase unreliable narrator, because like what you're trying to say there is actually that anything which is narrated is unreliable. There is no objective truth communicable through a text, especially when you try to say, oh, here is a character's experience. You're immediately removing any attempt at objectivity, because in fact the best objectivity you can come to in that situation is to admit that your attempt will always be futile, and to instead communicate an emotional or psychological truth, which this episode very much does through his stylings of the camcorder, his own framing, his own understanding of things. You see a truth about his experience which is scattered and littered with reference and influenced by his own denial in a way that is like very emotionally significant.
But Brian, what if I don't want to know psychological truth? What if I want to know what room was Andrew in when he said this? But that doesn't make sense because that room isn't beside there, so therefore it's not true.
Well, I mean, you could check the Buffy fact files. I'm sure they show exactly his they plot his movements through this episode physically. So.
Oh, I would love to see a floor plan of Buffy says. Actually, I think that would be fun.
Yeah, I think someone's done it before. I saw a really fascinating TikTok the other day, which was a floor, like it was a drawn out floor plan of the New Girl apartment, and I was like, that apartment was really well realized.
Yeah.
As in, like I always knew where they were.
Yeah.
Whereas opposed to the Friends apartment, tiny, like a huge apartment, beautiful, but also really simple in terms of how it was presented. And yet, there was a second bedroom you just never fucking saw.
Yeah.
Stuff like that, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. No, sitcom spaces are really haunted. I also think the way they often, this is a complete aside, but also in Buffy's house, how they try to portray that people can have private conversations in rooms that are directly beside each other and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Anyway, fascinating episode. Do you like it?
I liked it. I'm having a really interesting, for me, experience looking at Andrew through this walkthrough because in retrospect he's a liked character. I think people have time for him, and a lot comes to it. He's very significant in the comics as well. So I'm kind of thinking about Andrew a lot, and in some ways I'm trying to find the part where he becomes likable in some ways, because I think he's very, that's different from entertaining and it's different from Tom Lennox's performance, which I think is very good, but even this episode didn't necessarily convince me that he deserves to be saved, in many ways. I suppose that is kind of the conversation, but I thought it was a really good justification of why he is in the house. Yeah.
It's funny, when apparently the episode was done specifically as a semi-backdoor pilot, they were trying to figure out how to continue on with Buffy to some degree with like another character, and this was one of their attempts. It was I read that on IMDb in the trivia section, so unsourced, so who's really to say for sure. It might have been in the director's commentary on the episode. I'm not sure if there is director's commentary for the episode even, but
it does specifically have the tone of all the Joss Whedon related properties which aren't the Buffy stuff.
It had a lot of smackings of Dr. Horrible specifically, and the kind of like the goofy humor in it is quite Joss Whedon-y. In a way that I didn't sometimes, I was like, this, it's fine here, and also parts of the DNA of this which I see in Dr. Horrible and stuff like that I really don't like, because I think Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog is genuinely atrocious.
I don't know if I remember almost anything about it except for the fact that I'm pretty certain it came in 2010.
I think it came out before that. Okay. I suppose as well, like you mentioned before the start of the episode, you would identify this as like an early example of kind of found footage or that kind of style of things, or kind of logs in the same way that might be influenced by Blair Witch Project. Yeah, so
I just think it's worth noting that obviously if you give a first example or an early example of anything, you'll always find something predating that, because that's how it works. But we're not that long after the Blair Witch Project, which really popularized, I think, this concept in filmic contexts. And also I think it's worth noting that when this episode of Buffy aired, there wasn't the following 20 years of many shows doing so many variations on a viewpoint recording of an otherwise objectively shock show. Yeah, I
would say that one of the real kicking off points for that culturally would probably be Cloverfield, which is 2007. Great movie, I think.
Yeah, personally. I listened to a podcast about Cloverfield recently, and there's a lot that stands up about it just as an experience.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's genuinely scary.
I love cultural events like that where people were getting sick coming out of Cloverfield because of
that shaky cam.
Oh, what's the word for that? For the nausea they get from
motion sickness.
Motion sickness. Sorry, I was grasping for that. And people obviously get motion sickness, not making fun of that. But I guess when there's a bit of crush around an events like that.
Yeah, or in Cannes in '93 when Pulp Fiction first aired and people getting fainting because of the images of the needle going in. It's did Quentin Tarantino specifically ask people to go in and faint, because that doesn't seem realistic now. Which is all it's all just degrees of separation removed from the people, the train which by all accounts did not happen. Anyway, did you know that?
No, I didn't. No, I did. I think it could happen. I would jump out of the way of a train if I was
by all accounts it didn't happen,
but I'm saying I think it did. Someone like me, if I was in the 20s
Uh-huh.
and I saw a train coming, I would scream.
I feel like I watched something debunking that whole thing.
Yeah, but see, you need to understand that some people go through life like I do, with my level of fortitude, where I fell on the floor screaming in the Bram Stoker's museum because an attendant put his hand on my shoulder, not a cast member, while a family of 4 and small children walked around me on the floor. I don't want to say.
How old were you?
It was like, I don't know, 13 to 15, probably in that range. Yeah.
So what do you think of, like, I mean, does Andrew deserve redemption in this episode? I mean, I think up to this point you can kind of see him as someone who has been, you know, he's clearly very easily influenced by anyone around him, and in this instance he's being influenced by positive forces, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's worthy of redemption. But I mean, I think by the end of the episode he has gone through a thing, you know, he's recognized that what he did to Jonathan, which he's been denying, was not this like huge, it wasn't that he was being controlled by the First, it wasn't that he was you know, he was scared and he ended up doing it. The reality is that, like, he did it willingly, and he now has to deal with the guilt of that.
Yeah, I enjoyed, in terms of the question whether he deserves redemption or has access to that path, I enjoyed the seeing of him giving multiple variations of how it wasn't his fault, you know. And I do think within the fiction of the show, he has the potential for redemption and the entitlement to it to a certain degree, because realistically, almost every one of the Scoobies has done something worse. Yeah.
And it's also, he's a human, you know, and like, it's a funny one because what he did, is it worse than what Faith did? No. You know,
that's actually almost literally what Faith did.
Yeah, and Faith is like, you know, kind of, I mean, I suppose Faith is dangerous on an ongoing basis, but also Faith needs to be removed from the narrative because she was too cool. Yeah,
but the thing with Andrew, and since the introduction of the trio, the thing that makes him so irredeemable up until a point is that misogyny and that incel-like behavior where he doesn't feel any reality or responsibility for what he's been doing. So I actually think it's very crucial that he does recognize, like, that's what the episode was about, but that all this veneer and this distancing of responsibility and accountability is really baked into how people like him engage with the world, and it takes a lot of force, I think, to actually bring him back to some level of perspective. And at that point, you know, he's at the very bottom of the ladder then, but he can start climbing up. But I actually think it's a really valuable distinction that even though he can engage in all the same surfacey things that people are doing, the other Scoobies have interiority and they have empathy and they have reflection capacity. And there's something so dangerous and so unteachable about people like Andrew when they don't have that. And like, that is actually in some ways a more difficult or a further distance for him to go to get onto the ladder than it is for someone like Willow to climb the ladder, because she's, even when she was going dark, she had the capacity to know it was wrong. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where people like Andrew are taught, like, it's a funny one. It's such a toxic masculinity thing where it's like you're taught from a young age that there's certain things that are owed to you about life, you know, which is partners and wealth and comfort and ease and success, because of being a man, essentially. And I think when you have someone who doesn't get that on the basis of there being kind of a bit of a loser and a geek or a nerd or whatever, that kind of incel reaction is very and that kind of nerd culture reaction is very, like, predictable. And I do think this episode deconstructs that a bit, where you say, no, you are responsible for your actions. You know, society isn't responsible for you having stabbed your friend, essentially. Just like, you know, it's interesting and good.
I was surprised in some ways, kind of, with this walkthrough of how much play the trio really as a unit gets, like, right into season 7.
Yeah.
Because it's not just that the characters are extant. Like, if you take a step back from the literalness of it, like, Warren, Jonathan and Andrew continue to interact and develop character or contribute character right up until this. Yeah.
Apparently Danny Strong's last scene he shot for the show was the "We Are As Gods" scene, which I think is actually a really nice send off to the character.
Yeah.
So I think the episode as well says obviously a lot about Buffy, not just in the fact that she was never going to stab Andrew. She had some inkling that the tears were the thing that was going to close the Hellgate, which sounds like a real hokey notion and a real like, you know, awkward conclusion to this plotline. I didn't hate it. You know, her like holding him over the thing and having him
scared. She was scary.
She was scary. And he genuinely repents. You know, he genuinely recognizes what he's done wrong. In a moment where he has nothing to gain from doing so, and you know, on a very legible metaphorical level, you can see the kind of the beginning point that kind of represents, which is a really wonderful thing, and it's good writing. But on a more like kind of general basis, I think this episode really presents a lot about Buffy and self-determination and kind of the existential question that is at the heart of this show. In the sense that like there's actually like a lot in this episode about just like about narrative and framing. So obviously Andrew presents a very clear framing of this whole thing where it's like, you know, oh well, what if Buffy, like, you know, people need to know what Buffy did here, and Buffy's reaction throughout is like, no, they don't. For one thing, the narrative is not the most important thing here. The life is the most important thing here. And in lots of ways, I feel like that's like quite a clear communication around Buffy meta-narrativistically, which is that Buffy needs to escape this narrative. You know, she needs to escape being the chosen one and the narrative that's been put on her through you know, the men in the Shadow Men, and then the Watchers, and then the circumstances of her life in her teenage years and young adulthood, which is to play this role of the chosen one. And instead Buffy needs to escape the narrative writ large to gain a life, which she does at the end of the show. So in this episode where she's saying, no, I don't need to be watched, actually. I don't need to be contained and scripted within this narrative. That comes true. You know, Buffy escapes the narrative, becoming normal and free. Yeah. Not normal, like becoming free, I suppose, most importantly, by the end of the show.
Becoming unscripted.
It's a funny one as well because, like, at one point in the episode, she does tell Andrew towards the end when she's, I think after she takes the camcorder off him, she says, stop telling stories, life isn't a story. Which is a very interesting counterpoint to where she was in season 6, especially in What's More Feeling, which the episode has a lot of connection to, I would say, where she says, like, you know, what is it? Life's a game and we all play a part. Life's a show and we all play a part. Yeah. Which obviously a very Shakespearean notion of, you know, well, like, I mean, almost literally that's what Shakespeare says in both Twelfth Night and Macbeth and a couple of other instances of, like, you know, that kind of existential concept of playing roles and taking meaning, etc., etc. And in this, Buffy says, like, no, it's not a story. This is genuine and actually happening. And that's a genuine response to the existential threat that exists in life. Or like existentialism, not like an existential as existence, where she's saying, I reject this concept that there's no meaning. I'm taking meaning. I'm constructing meaning, and I'm experiencing a post-absurdist life of actuality. So that's my thoughts there.
Yeah, no, I think there's absolutely a very core thread throughout the whole show about that narrative textually, though, the narrative for the Slayer, the narrative that she constructs, and her flowing with and against the tension of it there, without even getting into the more like the more rarefied kind of meta narrative kind of stuff. Even within the show, like, the narrative is very explicit, and I think she's a great example as a protagonist where she highlights that there aren't clear answers to these things, because it is the right answer for her not to be watched, and as someone who is being watched on rails and within the confines of destiny since she was 15, it's very natural that she would feel that she wants to get outside of that, and her drive to do that is what ultimately frees not her but thousands of women and the entire line. And yet I think the unanimity, is that word, of everyone else's response to let Andrew tell the story show that there is actually value to it. It's just value that maybe she's not capable of seeing because she is the focus of it. Like, I do think that ultimately there is value for what Andrew is doing. Someone has to do that, and that the framing story of the Slayer and what Buffy does, Buffy both deserves it. She deserves that recognition, but it can be motivating for other women and other girls, and has been. Like, literally, you could argue that if Buffy was right across the board, then there's no point for the television show Buffy Slayer of the Vampires. But the power, the danger is that the power in that narrative isn't with her.
Yeah.
Her narrative has to always be constructed by the people around her and the people who perceive her. And that can be a force for great good, is what I'm getting at. And it can be, if handled judiciously, it can be empowering. But as a 7-season rewatch podcast indicates, that if you cannot be aware of every aspect of the narrative, how it will work 20 years and rely on 100 years, etc. The power for that will be with other people. And I think that she is fundamentally always and ultimately a person, rather than a hero, rather than a symbol, rather than an embodiment of the Slayer agency. She is her person is her groundedness, and a person wilks under that amount of power, and she is the focal point for a magnifying glass. And I think that it's just interesting to see how everyone responds to being part of that story. Yeah,
it's funny as well. There's a real one of my favorite things about Buffy is the failed answers it gives. So in the problems it presents, it often will attempt at a solution and then realize, no, that's flawed, and abandon it as a narrative. So in Buffy's attempt to escape the narrative, an attempt to become normal, you see normal again, where she her answer to, I need to get out of this, I need to be free of this, is to disassociate and to remove herself entirely. And instead, what she needs to do is to redistribute power and to empower other women. Which, I mean, I think, if you look at those two things post narratively, in Normal Again, she's saying, I'm just going to leave and no longer engage in this. And in Chosen, she says, I have shown other women how to be more empowered. And and therefore I've able to remove myself from the text on that basis. And it's a fascinating, it also kind of contributes to the season 6 and 7 are one arc kind of concept as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And she, as a lot of this liberating struggle entails, she does it so that the women after her don't have to. And they won't. No one will experience the story. No one will have an experience as a Slayer like Buffy ever again. Yeah,
and it's why Buffy the Vampire Slayer is the title after Kendra and after Faith, is because Buffy is the Vampire Slayer and she's the final Vampire Slayer. Okay, should we move on to the dust? Oh, we probably said, there's something to be talked about there about Xander and Anya. I don't find it hugely interesting. They sleep together again in this episode to put an end to the relationship, which obviously when they first sleep together, Anya says, well, I'm glad I got that out of my system.
Yeah. I think Anya's effervescent in the episode. I enjoyed her.
Totally agree. Emma Caulfield was wonderful in the episode, especially in the scene where she's eating grapes in Andrew's fantasy.
The fantasy scenes. Yeah, to be fair, we'll just mention briefly, I think that the fantasy cutaways, Andrew's imagination, Tom Lang's performance, all of that's actually quite funny. I thought particularly the judicious use of editing to make the scenes in the magic shop from season 6 with Dark Willow make it seem like the Dark Willow is fighting and being defeated by Andrew in particular was quite funny. But yeah, I think it was such
there's no attempt to hide the editing away. It was shot of Willow, counter shot of Andrew and Jonathan, but the counter shots were clearly shot later, and they're just it's fine, it's funny.
Yeah, absolutely.
I suppose then, kind of as a final note, this episode it continues the season 7 theme of making the old new again. So you have a
montage of crises, basically.
Yeah, you have a boy exploding because he's too freaked out, even though Buffy suggested he get a foot massage, who we found out while watching the episode the actor is not someone's name who I wrote down, which is really stupid of me, but he's Colin McRae from Gilmore Girls, who was in the Life and Death Brigade. I looked him up on Instagram. Seems like a very sweet guy. Very lots of posts about BLM, lots of posts about social justice issues.
Buffy seemed all very, very unperturbed when he exploded.
Yeah. But
that was just a boy, like
yeah, no, it really was. But yeah, that's who he is. He's also in Gilmore Girls. He's in a lot, and he was in the Year in the Life as well. But by all accounts, I don't think he has a lot going on in his life, except for not going in his life. I don't think he's had any significant roles beyond Gilmore Girls.
Sure.
Because he has it in his bio and everything, and it's like, okay.
But
anyway,
see, people, we have to remember,
if I was in Gilmore Girls, I would never stop talking to it personally.
This is the danger of watching television like this. Is that people go on to have other careers. People don't just act.
Yeah. So you also have a moment referring to Marcy from Out of Mind, Out of Sight, where a girl is going invisible and Buffy sees her and is like, oh, fuck's sake, goes over and in a lovely widescreen mess in the episode you get where you should have had the actor who's supposed to be invisible cut out of the shot. Instead, she's fully visible in the corner of the shot, and Buffy goes to slap her, and her hand could not more clearly stop before making contact with this woman's face. Yeah,
and then when it cooks the reverse shot, she fades back into existence despite being clearly visible in the widescreen shot.
It's quite funny. So you also have like 5 children burning their eyes out and becoming bringers, and I think they kill them, right?
No, at least one ran away, and then it's one of those ambiguous things where it's like, because bringers are treated like they're not human.
Yeah.
But these kids definitely were human. So they kind of just disappear out of frame kind of thing. And then the entire school just goes fully Event Horizon, Mad Max kind of,
Is this the last appearance of the school before the finale?
Oh, I don't know. It's completely trash. So I wonder if this is when the school narrative collapses a little bit.
Yeah. And you also have Robin Wood, who is somewhat influenced by the seal to... Like,
which seal is that, Brian?
Danzitar.
That's the one.
To attack Buffy a little bit, and then she's like, stop that, and she knocks him out, and he's like, oh crap, sorry about that.
He nearly stakes Spike as well.
Yeah, in a moment which is like quite ambiguous as to whether or not it's being influenced by the thing or if he wants to do it. In the next episode we'll see he doesn't really want to kill Spike. So that's all quite cool. Okay, dusting. Some Buffy bits for you there, Joel. The Cheeseman appears during Andrew and Jonathan's shared nightmare while they're in Mexico, which seems to be presented as text rather than part of like Andrew's
I think it's something that actually happened to them. Yeah. Because that's when specifically his memories are being drawn out by the crystal, so that it's meant to be actually happening. Yeah.
This is the second last alternative Gur Arg. So they say we are as gods in the Gur Arg, which is quite funny. As I was saying, this is an exploration of the potential spin-off for Andrew, which I would have watched, but also give us the Faith and Ripper spin-offs that we deserve at some point, please.
Can you imagine if they did it now, kind of Faith and Ripper 20 years later?
God. Yeah, that would be better than it would have been then. I would love that.
I actually think they would be potentially more, if there was, off topic, but if there was to be a Buffy relaunch, I think they might be more interesting mentor characters, at least for season 1, than bringing in Buffy herself. Yeah.
And another point is they at one point mentioned the kind of like the mysterious dialect of Tuong, which is suggested as being like some kind of like demonic script. The Tuong are people in the Sahara, and they're nomads, and they have a language. I think it's kind of shitty to communicate that. That's like, I think it's real colonizer shit.
Yeah, mysterious, demonic, inexplicable, exotic language, basically. Yeah.
I read this. I actually read a good tweet today. So the storm that we're sitting through is Storm Barra, and I saw people like, don't communicate that it's a translation of Barry. It is not a translation of Barry. Barra is his own Irish name. It's a diminutive of a Fiumbar, among other things, and there's good suggestion that Barry as a name is diminutive of Barra, and when you communicate otherwise, you are overwriting indigenous language. And it's like, you never think about Irish as an indigenous language, and it's like, of course it is. Anyway, whatever. So not to suggest that it's on a similar level to indigenous communities of the Americas and stuff like that. Which
I actually think the it's an interesting point, but I think indigenous languages, indigenous communities are so multifarious, and the colonizer perspective is so uniform.
So true.
That I don't think any of the thing in danger of drawing unfair comparisons. We were all oppressed by the broadly same force, but there's no question all of our experiences are very distinct.
Yeah, 100%. I'm pretty sure at one point that Andrew calls Buffy a top, which I mean is true. I mean, so I really do respect it. I want to know where Andrew got brown markers for his drawings.
He does a lot of drawings.
He does, and they're good. But like brown markers, who owns brown markers for whiteboards?
Yeah,
weird.
Literally, I've done a lot of resource ordering. I've never seen brown markers on the menu. So.
At one point, I really enjoyed when Andrew says, "Wasn't Jonathan the cutest thing?" And I will acknowledge that what I've written on my notes is, "Wasn't Warren the cutest thing?" Which is a little worrying.
He did say something about Warren. He's like, Warren wasn't he wonderful? And
Yeah.
wasn't Jonathan just the cutest thing?
Yeah. I quite enjoyed when Andrew said that Jonathan told him that he said he would buy me a burrow, which I quite enjoyed. Though I will say I do deeply question the extensive use of Dutch angles while they're in the school. Not necessary whatsoever. Do you have any Buffy Bits, Joe?
I will say on that note about the burrow, there was a real portrayal of the shocks of Mexico that they were in like desolate desert, which I think was not necessarily necessary. Yeah,
I think so too.
What else I want to add to that? I just enjoy Andrew's perspective for Buffy Slayer of the Vampire and all. It tickles me. It's funny.
I also quite enjoyed when he was at the beginning when he was saying the wind was cruel. Cruel.
Also, whenever you see his camcorder perspective, it has this like hokey clip art frame around it.
Yeah, it does.
Which is very good. The topless Spike as well in his fantasy.
Yeah,
where he says something like, "They've a hot unbridled passion, although technically as a vampire he is room temperature." So just funny. Yeah.
There's another point where he's watching Spike and Wood like fight, and he's like, what does he say? This sexual tension you could cut with a knife.
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, that is adding to the further Oedipal issues that Wood already presented, and so did Spike. It's like if they both want to fuck their mother and kill their father, what does it mean that they also want to fuck each other?
Yeah, see, it's a collapsing star at that point. And the last few points I'm going to say is I enjoyed the obvious tip of the hat where there's what could be misinterpreted as a gratuitous shot of Kennedy and Willow kissing on the cake, and he's like, hey Rieger, this is what you really want to see, and zooms in. It's like, look at this great sash work that Xander has done on the window frame. But my favorite shot he does in the entire episode is when he sees Dawn. He's like, Dawn Summers, this wonderful girl, and she used to be a key, and then he sees a pair of keys on the table and goes and zooms in on it. It's like editing, directing a key. I thought that was really enjoyable.
Okay, so some fashion notes. Andrew in his house coat and stuff at the beginning doing his Masterpiece Theatre is quite funny, not necessarily great.
Masterpiece Theatre is a good note. I had Old Spice commercial then.
It's clearly Masterpiece Theatre.
No, you're absolutely right.
With lots of Star Wars memorabilia in the background. I quite liked Andrew's casual sportswear in the episode. I was like, you know what, someone could wear that today and look pretty good. I thought Xander looked reasonably inoffensive. I thought Anya eating grapes, the way she was dressed, lovely
graps.
red and stuff. Graps?
It's pronounced graps.
Oh, graps. Very beautiful and wonderful. I thought that Jonathan looked like a literal child wearing the vest in his pajamas. So that was not great. And I quite liked Buffy's chic brown jacket at the end of the episode. It was just kind of short, like it wasn't a long jacket. She tends to wear quite long jackets, and I thought it was quite nice. It worked quite well. I suppose it's not really fashion, but I did kind of thought I thought the bringer symbols over the eyes of the students was spooky and cool. I'm just trying to figure out a way to bring in to bring into the episode that I now have a note here, which is that first Warren really loves to gay bait Andrew, and it's so true. He
really it's where that vulnerability is, I suppose. Yeah. I'll just add from a fashion side slightly that I think that Buffy's glamour when she's in the fantasy, that glamour shot of her,
incredible, pouring cereal,
hair, pouring cereal, Spike with his top off, great look, have to say as well. It's classics for a reason. And I thought there was a lot of 35-year-old students trying to fit into teenage clothes in this episode as well.
So true. Yeah. Okay. Do you have a death gun first, Joe?
Yeah, so two vampires acrobatically staked by Buffy in the opening sequence, and one very stressed boy bereft of foot rub who explodes. That's all the death, actually.
Great. And do you have a rating for me?
Gosh, what do I think about this episode? I think I might give this a 9.4 salty seals.
Yeah.
It was really good. I don't have I'm saying this with my back teeth, but I don't have a super strong memory of this episode. I know it was significant. I wasn't let down. I enjoyed it. I actually think I added a lot. It had everything that a good episode needs, which is entertaining performance, moves the plot forward, adds a lot to both the current understanding of the characters and the meta narrative, and just hangs together reasonably effortlessly.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. I'm going to give it 9.1 marching band rules out of 10. Yeah, I agree. I think it's well done. I think it's well considered. I think I liked that it took the piss out of Buffy's speechifying. I think that's appropriate.
Yeah.
I think this run of episodes is pretty good. I think there's maybe one or two bum episodes in towards the end of the season. But I think that middle point of a slog we're mostly over at this point.
On that speechifying note, I also liked that at one point Buffy said to Robin when he was Buffy speaking, that I was like, oh, you're starting to talk like me.
Yeah, it is nice. So yeah, I thought it was quite good. I thought it was very good. I think it'd probably be my top 30 episodes kind of thing. Probably not hugely higher though. I'm starting to think about this because we're going to do the rankings of all the episodes.
Thing, yeah.
Okay, and let's move on to Cordelia Chase.
Great. This is going to be, I think, my briefest Cordelia Chase.
5 failed feminist gestures.
It's a 5. It was a crash down from the previous episodes.
Like a narrative, like just crumbling.
Because there's almost nothing to mention in terms of what happens. It's the episode's players, and the premise is Gwen Lightning Girl. I want to say Gwen Reagan. If her name actually is Gwen Reagan, that's hilarious. I think it is Gwen Reagan, who I thought we had seen the last of. This is actually her last episode. She comes back for one last job. She needs Gunn's help specifically for some reason to do a heist. And she says this for one thing, it's actually for the other. They do kind of a dress up thing at a gala. There's some fight with a Japanese businessman's like karate wielding henchman or something. Mm-hmm. Gunn does some James Bond stuff.
Karate.
I was trying to think what we could call what they were doing. Kendo, actually, probably, because there's a lot of stick work. Mm-hmm. And there's some, various back and forth between Gwen and Gung about being outsiders. She's actually looking for a device which will allow her to control her electric powers, which allows her to have sex for the first time, which unfortunately is with Gung. And at one point, Gun throws a man over his shoulder and he falls in slow motion while Gun fixes his tie. Yeah. And then in terms of the main plot,
That is the A plot of the episode.
That is the A plot of the episode in terms of the ongoing seasonal plot. There's a bigger conversation about the fact that Cordelia and Connor are having a baby, and it's like, that's really weird. Mm-hmm. They tell
Connor confronts Cordelia being like, why are you trying to get me to do all this bad stuff? And she's like, no, I have good reason. And he's like, okay. Yeah,
basically. Angel, everyone tells Angel not to feel guilty about what Angela's doing, and he's like, oh, I don't. And it's like, oh, okay, maybe you should actually. And then the kicker is meant to be that they've laid a trap where Jasmine as Cordelia tries to kill Lauren, who is about to discover her, but they've actually laid a trap because they're like, oh, Cordelia's been a very bad girl. And it ends with Lauren shaking a magic 8-ball and saying, has Cordelia basically been the villain? And it says, definitely. So like a car wreck of an episode. So I will probably give it 5. I'll give it 5 because I think it was a perfectly benign episode. There wasn't anything that I thought was bad as such. It just was very unmemorable, but I do like that they gave Gung a storyline which wasn't stereotypical and allowed him to just have his own time outside of the narrative. I think it was the wrong time to do it, but I think he did perfectly well with the material, and I think it worked perfectly fine as like a really bargain basement adventure episode, but not anything that was actually objectionable. So right down the middle, 5 failed feminist gestures. Yeah,
I think there were worse episodes of Angel, not a huge amount worse.
Yeah. So that's it. So thanks so much for joining us. Hopefully you will be here next week, and so will we on our house post storm. But we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please let us know. Tell your friends. Tell the cultist students in your basement.
Yeah.
And we will see you right here, folks, next time on Buffy
Boys.
See ya.
See yas.